This ghetto trash doesn't deserve to fly. Gate Agent Brenda Martinez hissed the words, her voice a low, venomous rumble of pure, unadulterated hatred. She struck a match. The small chemical flare illuminated her face, a mask of petty $15 an hour tyranny. The flame shot toward my passport, my federal passport. Brenda's thick, manicured fingers gripped the burgundy document over a metal wastebasket, her eyes, dead and cold, locked on my face. She was savoring every second of my shock. Before this goes any further, I need to know what part of the world you're watching from. Comment your city and the time right now. My breath caught, a purely autonomic response, but my mind was a steel trap, my eyes a camera, recording every detail. I wasn't a passenger. I was a hunter, and the prey had just willingly walked into the snare. Passengers in the crowded O'Hare terminal, Gate C-12, whipped out their phones. The digital native instinct to record injustice rather than stop it was the single most valuable asset in my investigation. Brenda, performing for her new audience, swept my first-class boarding pass off the counter with her forearm. The paper fluttered to the dirty, scuffed floor, landing near my worn, unbranded sneakers. "Pick it up, honey," she commanded, her voice loud enough for the entire gate to hear. "On your knees, where you belong." The match flame, held with a theatrical, trembling hand, kissed the corner of my passport. The gold-embossed lettering of United States of America began to bubble, blacken, and curl. Smoke, acrid and chemical, curled upward. "Stop filming," Brenda barked at the recording passengers, a moment of sudden panic in her eyes, not of guilt, but of annoyance. "This fraud doesn't need witnesses. I'm just doing my job." My messenger bag, heavy with my real credentials, slipped from my shoulder. My government-issued wallet, the one with the badge, remained hidden inside. The corner of the passport, my official photo and biometric data page, erupted in a small, orange flame. Brenda's grin widened as she watched the federal seal melt into a black, sticky ash. "There we go," she cooed, dropping the burning, smoldering document into the metal wastebasket. The thud was final. Problem solved. I stared at my identity dissolving. The burgundy cover crackled, my photo warped in the heat, my features disappearing behind a bubbling plastic film. "You just destroyed a federal document," I said quietly, my voice perfectly level, a statement of fact, not an accusation. "I destroyed a fake." Brenda crossed her arms, her chest puffing with pride, her name tag, BRENDAM, 15 years service, glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. "That's what we do to trash that tries to sneak into first class." Brenda Martinez, 48 years old, a gate agent with 47 separate official passenger complaints of racial bias and harassment filed against her in the last 24 months, all of which had been cleared by her complicit supervisor, had no idea who I was. She saw ghetto trash. She saw a 30-year-old black woman in a hoodie and worn jeans, a fraud who had dared to present a first-class ticket. She saw a nobody to be humiliated, a problem to be erased. She had no idea she was talking to Senior Inspector Maya Clark, badge number 47 of the Federal Aviation Administration, Criminal Enforcement Division. She couldn't possibly know that I wasn't just a federal agent. I was the lead federal investigator, the shark the DOJ and DHS send in when they need to build an airtight systemic case. She couldn't know that I wasn't flying today. I was hunting, and she was my prey. My presence in her line in this disguise was not an accident. It was the public, overt phase of Operation Terminal Rot, a 6-month, multi-agency investigation I was leading into this specific airline for a documented, verifiable pattern of civil rights violations and criminal conspiracy. Her supervisor, Janet Phillips, and the gate manager, Tom Rodriguez, were my real targets. They were the ones running a sophisticated, cash-for-upgrade scam, bumping ticketed minority passengers like me to sell their first-class seats to white standby passengers for cash bribes, a scheme that was costing the airline millions and violating a dozen federal statutes. Brenda was just their enforcer, the racist attack dog they used to handle the passengers they intended to defraud. For 6 months, my team, A joint task force from the FAA, the DHS Office of the Inspector General (OIG), and the DOJ's Civil Rights Division had been gathering evidence. We had the financial records. We had the wire transfers. We had the audio surveillance. But we needed the in-person act. We needed to connect the financial crime to the civil rights violation, and we needed it on camera, in a public forum, in a way that would bypass the airline's powerful union lawyers. And Brenda, in her spectacular, breathtaking arrogance, had just handed it to me. She hadn't just torn my passport. She had, in an act of pure sociopathic malice, set it on fire. She had willfully and maliciously destroyed a United States diplomatic travel document, a direct, prosecutable, and undeniable felony under 18 U.S. Code, Section 1361, willful destruction of government property. She had, in front of 200 witnesses and 500,000 live stream viewers, committed a second felony under 18 U.S. Code, Section 1519, destruction of evidence in a federal investigation, my investigation. And she had done it all while barking racist, dehumanizing orders, a perfect, textbook, gift-wrapped violation of 18 U.S. Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Brenda thought she had just put a fraud in her place. She thought she had won, that she had protected her little gate-side fiefdom. She had no idea she just committed 3 federal felonies on camera against the lead federal investigator assigned to her case. She had no idea she just became the star witness in her own federal indictment. She had no idea that her problem was solved, but her life, as she knew it, was over. She just made the worst, the most expensive, and the very last mistake of her entire pathetic career. The smoke from my burning passport, my federal passport, curled up from the metal wastebasket, a thin, acrid ribbon of incense from a profane sacrifice. The gold federal seal had melted into a small, unrecognizable puddle of slag. The passengers were a sea of stunned faces and raised smartphones, a digital Greek chorus capturing every second of the crime. Brenda Martinez, her arms crossed, basked in the stunned silence, a smug, triumphant grin on her face. She had done it. She had neutralized the threat. She had put the ghetto trash in her place. She was the queen. Her victory, however, lasted exactly 12 seconds. The competitor system, right on cue, arrived. It wasn't the police, not yet. It was her supervisor, Gary, a man in a rumpled, ill-fitting suit whose official title was customer service supervisor, but whose real job, as my investigation had proven, was chief enabler. He was the one who cleared Brenda's 47 prior complaints. He was her partner in the Cash for Upgrade scam. He arrived, not with the alarm of a man responding to a fire, but with the annoyed sigh of a manager whose lunch break had been interrupted. He was followed by a local airport police officer, a beat cop named Miller who looked bored, and who I knew from our surveillance was a regular recipient of free, first-class upgrades from Gary and Brenda. He wasn't law enforcement. He was their paid muscle. All right, what's the story here, Bren?" Gary asked, his voice a bored, nasal whine. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the smoke. He didn't look at the passengers. He spoke only to her. He was, in a public forum, establishing his allegiance. He was showing the crowd and me that he was here to support her, not to investigate. He was a complicit member of the conspiracy. This was the villain's trap. This was the platform. This was the moment where the system, believing itself to be invulnerable, would create its official version of events. This was the arrogant lie, and I was thrilled. My audio recorder, stitched into the strap of my messenger bag, was capturing every perjured, slanderous, and career-ending word. Brenda, feeding off her supervisor's immediate visible support, launched into her performance. It was a masterpiece of fabricated victimhood. "Oh, Gary, it was awful," she said, her voice suddenly high and trembling, a damsel in distress. She pointed a shaking finger at me. She cut the line, screaming, totally belligerent. "I asked for her ID and she gave me that." She pointed at the smoldering ruin in the trash can. "It was obviously a fake. You know, the cheap ones these types buy. The laminate was peeling, the ink was running, it was garbage." I confiscated it per protocol, she lied, and that's when she assaulted me. She tried to grab it from me, she lunged, we struggled, and it tore and she set it on fire. She must have had a lighter. She tried to destroy the evidence. She destroyed it, not me. It was a brilliant lie. It was audacious. She had reversed the narrative completely. I was now the one who had destroyed the document. I was the one who was violent. Gary nodded, his face a mask of practiced, managerial concern. He finally turned to me, his eyes cold and dead. "Look," he said, "we're seeing a lot of this. A lot." He was speaking to me but performing for the crowd. People get caught with fake IDs, they get aggressive, they play the victim card, and then they claim discrimination just to get a payout or a free flight. He was using the trigger words, the racist dog whistles, painting me as a litigious, fraudulent, and angry black woman. "It's a classic shakedown," he said, shaking his head in sorrow. "She's just trying to deflect from the fact that she's the one committing a federal crime." He then turned to the beat cop, Officer Miller, who had been idly examining his fingernails. "Officer, I want this woman detained. She attempted to board with fraudulent documents, and then, when confronted, she assaulted my employee and destroyed the evidence. She is unstable and a clear threat to this terminal." This was the peak arrogance. This was the moment the system believed it had won. The local cop, their ally, was here. The evidence was a pile of ash. The victim, me, had been successfully reframed as the aggressor. The hero, Brenda, was being protected. Gary, smug and secure in his petty kingdom, turned to Brenda, and in a move so arrogant, so perfect, that I almost wanted to applaud, he winked at her. A slow, deliberate wink that said, "I got this. Good job." "Good catch, Bren," he said, loud enough for the passengers to hear. "I'll make sure this goes in your file as a commendation. We don't tolerate fraud at this station." He had just on a live federal wire announced his intention to reward his employee for committing a felony and had confirmed his own role as a co-conspirator. It was beautiful. Officer Miller, the beat cop, finally moved. He adjusted his belt and sauntered over, his hand on his taser. "All right, ma'am," he sighed, his voice dripping with boredom. "Let's go. You're in a lot of trouble. We're going to put you in a holding cell, let you cool off, and figure out who you really are." They had built their narrative. They had signed their confessions. And now they were about to make their final, fatal mistake. They were about to illegally detain a federal agent. The arrogant lie was complete. My turn. Officer Miller adjusted his utility belt, the leather creaking in the new, tense silence. He was the local muscle, the third piece of their corrupt little puzzle, and he was here to finish the job. He sauntered over, his hand resting casually on the bright yellow taser on his hip. He looked at me not as a citizen but as a problem, a piece of paperwork. "All right, ma'am," he sighed, his voice dripping with a lifetime of boredom and unearned authority. "Let's go. You're in a lot of trouble. We're going to put you in a holding cell, let you cool off, and figure out who you really are." He reached out, his fingers spread, aiming for my arm, to grab me, to haul me from the terminal like a bag of trash, just as his friends, Brenda and Gary, had intended. The entire terminal was watching. The sea of smartphones was a wall of digital eyes, all waiting to see the ghetto trash get her final, definitive comeuppance. They wanted the climax. They were about to get one. This was the moment, the code switch. As his fingers brushed the fabric of my hoodie, I spoke. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I didn't resist. I simply spoke. And the voice that came out was not the voice of Maya, the passenger. It was the voice of Inspector Clark, the federal officer. It was a voice forged in interrogation rooms and federal courtrooms. It was cold, it was flat, and it was absolute. "Stop." It was one word, but that one word was a brick wall. It was so loaded with immediate, unquestionable, and lethal authority that the officer's hand, his entire body, froze. He was a beat cop trained to respond to two things: compliance and resistance. He was utterly unprepared for command. His eyes, which had been bored and dismissive, snapped to mine, wide and suddenly, terribly confused. "Put the pen down, officer," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. I wasn't speaking to him. I was speaking to his partner, who was dutifully starting to write the false trespassing ticket. The partner's pen stopped, hovering over the paper. I then turned my full, cold attention to the real targets. "And you," I said to Gary, the supervisor, who was still smirking. "You're going to want to listen very, very carefully." The shift in the room was palpable. It was a physical drop in temperature. The competitor system, the corrupt triangle of Brenda, Gary, and Miller, had just hit a snag. Gary's smirk faltered, replaced by a confused scowl. "Excuse me," he sputtered, trying to regain his footing. "You're in no position to give orders. You're a suspect. You're being removed." "I am not," I said, taking one deliberate, confident step toward him. "You, however, are about to be." The technical deconstruction had now officially begun. "Let's review the law, shall we, Gary? You seem a little rusty." I pointed a single, steady finger at the metal wastebasket, where the smoldering, blackened ruin of my passport lay. "First," I began, my voice the clear, precise instrument of a federal prosecutor. "Per the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 22, Section 51.7, the only authorized protocol for a suspected fraudulent passport is to detain the document and surrender it to federal authorities. Not," I added, "to set it on fire." I turned to Brenda, who had stopped her triumphant preening and was now watching me with a new, dawning horror. "Your agent, Brenda, didn't just confiscate a document. She just committed a federal felony under 18 U.S. Code, Section 1361, the willful destruction of government property. That's a 10-year sentence. Second, because that document was evidence in a federal investigation. My investigation. She also committed a felony under 18 U.S. Code, Section 1519, destruction and alteration of records in a federal investigation. That's another 20 years. She didn't solve a problem, Gary. She just bought herself 30 years in a federal penitentiary." The color drained from Brenda's face. She looked at Gary, her eyes wide with panic. "Gary, he's lying, right?" Gary was speechless. This was not the confused, aggressive woman he'd been told about. This was something else. You can't prove any of that," he stammered, his last desperate defense. It's her word against yours. You're a fraud." "Proof?" I almost laughed. "Gary, you're an amateur. You're worried about the passengers' phones. This was the receipt." I slowly, deliberately tapped the strap of my messenger bag. "I am a federal agent. I am always recording." My entire interaction with Brenda, from her initial ghetto trash comment to her demanding I get on my knees, to her striking the match, to her wink to you, is on a high-definition encrypted audio file that is, as of 30 seconds ago, already time-stamped, geotagged, and uploaded to a secure DHS cloud server. I smiled. "That's my receipt, Gary. That's the evidence." "And that's just my recording," I continued, twisting the knife. "That doesn't even count the actual, high-definition, audio-enabled CCTV footage from the camera right above your head. Camera 4C, the one my team, 6 weeks ago, had a secret federal tap placed on, as part of Operation Terminal Rot. The operation, Gary, that you and Brenda are the primary targets of." This was the villain's realization. It was no longer a chill, it was a polar vortex. Brenda made a small, strangled, choking sound and stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. Gary, his face was no longer pale, it was gray, the color of ash, the color of death. A tap," he whispered. "Operation. What?" The beat cop Miller was the first to truly break. He was a cop. He knew the language. He knew DHS. He knew federal tap. He knew with a sickening, career-ending certainty that he was on the wrong side of this. He physically, visibly backed away. His hands, which had been on his taser, were now up in the universal don't shoot position. "Look," he stammered, his voice cracking, I'm just here for the 911 call. This is a federal matter. This is out of my jurisdiction." He was trying to save himself. He was abandoning his friends. "You're damn right it is, officer," I said. I then turned my attention back to the collapsing supervisor, who was now leaning on a podium, his legs shaking. "And Gary, let's talk about your lie, your official report. You said I was the aggressor." You said I was unstable. You called me an outside agitator in my own country. You attempted to coerce a federal witness me into silence. That, Gary, is witness tampering, 18 U.S. Code, Section 1512. You are catastrophically stupid. You and Brenda weren't just running a little cash-for-upgrade scam. You were running a criminal conspiracy, and you just assaulted a federal agent on camera during the commission of her duties. An agent, Brenda whispered, her voice barely audible. You're police. I'm not a cop, Brenda, I said. I'm the person who investigates cops. I'm the person who investigates you. I am the chief investigator for the FAA's National Anti-Discrimination Task Force. Gary's mind finally snapped. He lurched forward. Who are you? You're lying. I want to see a badge. Show me a badge. He had done it. He had demanded the one thing I was waiting for. He had demanded the reveal. The passengers, who had been listening in stunned, absolute silence, all raised their phones again, their lenses zeroed in. The live streams, which had been captioned "Racist Gate Agent," were now exploding with comments. OMG, she's a Fed. This is a sting. Holy shit, he just demanded her badge. I looked at Gary, at his pale, sweating, terrified face. I looked at Brenda, who was sobbing, her career, her pension, her freedom all gone. I looked at the ruin of my passport, smoldering in the bin. You want to see my badge, Gary? I said, my voice a low, lethal whisper. You and Brenda and Officer Miller have, for the last 20 minutes, been operating under the assumption that I am trash, that I am a fraud, that I am a nobody. I slowly, deliberately reached into my messenger bag. You want to see my badge, I repeated. You're about to, and in about 30 seconds, you're going to wish you were blind. Gary had demanded it. He had, in his final, fatal act of hubris, actually demanded to see my badge. He and Brenda and the complicit Officer Miller were all staring at me, their faces a mask of confused, pathetic defiance. They were still operating under the assumption that I was a fraud, that my technical legal jargon was a bluff, a desperate, last-ditch script from a cornered criminal. The sea of smartphones around us, the 200 witnesses, the 500,000 people watching on live streams were all holding their breath. They were waiting for the reveal. I was, as I had been for my entire career, happy to oblige. You want to see my badge, Gary? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. You're sure, because once I show it to you, this misunderstanding, it becomes something else. It becomes a felony. This is your last chance. Are you sure you want me to do this? He didn't understand. He thought I was stalling. Show me the badge, you bitch, he spat, his mask of civility finally completely gone. Or I'm having you cuffed. As you wish, I said. I slowly, deliberately reached into my messenger bag. I didn't reach for a wallet. I reached for the heavy, leather-bound credential case. I pulled it out. It wasn't cheap, flimsy plastic. It was thick, black, conditioned leather, heavy and embossed with a single gold federal seal. I let the weight of it rest in my palm for a second, letting them see it, letting them feel it. Then I flipped it open. The sound it made, that simple thwap of leather, was the sound of their world ending. Inside, on one side, was my official holographic polycarbonate-encased ID card. On the other, recessed in a custom-cut mold, was the badge. It was not a police badge. It was heavy, gold, and intricately detailed. It was a Federal Aviation Administration Special Agent badge. The word Inspector was emblazoned below the eagle. It was a badge most people, even most cops, would go their entire lives without ever seeing. It was the badge of the people who hunt them. This was the identity reveal. This was the thunderbolt. I am Senior Inspector Maya Clark, I said, my voice cutting through the terminal. Federal Aviation Administration, Office of Security and Hazardous Materials Safety, Criminal Enforcement Division. My badge number is 47, the passport you just illegally destroyed, the one you called ghetto trash. I pointed to the smoldering ruin in the bin. That was my official, federally issued diplomatic travel document, the one I use for undercover investigations. The one that, as of 30 minutes ago, was active government property. The systemic shock was instantaneous. It was visceral, it was beautiful. Brenda, the main villain, was the first to break. She didn't just go pale. The blood fled her face, leaving a waxy, greenish-yellow mask. Her knees, her actual physical knees, buckled. She made a sound, a high-pitched guttural gasp, like a dying animal. FAA, she stammered, her mind snapping. I thought you were a fraud. It looked fake. Gary, the competitor supervisor, was next. His collapse was intellectual, which was worse. He knew the acronyms, he knew the jurisdiction, he knew in that one blinding, catastrophic second that this was not a civil rights complaint. This was a criminal case. FAA, Inspector, he whispered, his eyes wide. That's federal, oh my God, oh my God. He was, I noted clinically, already calculating the years. 18 USC 1519. 18 USC 242. He was doing the math. He was correctly terrified. But the best reaction was Officer Miller, the beat cop. The muscle. He, unlike the gate agents, had been to an academy. He knew what a federal badge meant. He knew what federal agent meant. He knew what criminal enforcement division meant. And he knew with a sickening pit-of-the-stomach certainty what it meant to have been caught on camera, conspiring with two civilians to unlawfully detain, harass, and file a false report against one. His body reacted before his brain. He took 2 huge, involuntary steps backward. His hands, which had been on his taser, flew up to his chest in a defensive, I'm not a threat posture. Holy, he breathed. He wasn't my problem, not anymore. He was already fumbling for his radio, his voice cracking. Dispatch. This is Miller at C-12. I need a supervisor down here. Now we have a federal situation. He was abandoning his friends. He was trying to save his own skin. This was the suiting up. It was time to take command. Brenda's armor had been a cheap polyester uniform and a 15-year service pin. Gary's armor had been a mid-level manager's title. My armor was the full, crushing, and absolute power of the United States federal government, and I was now fully suited up. I didn't let them recover. I didn't give them a moment to think, to collude, to build a new lie. I reached back into my bag and pulled out my second piece of equipment, my secure, government-issued smartphone. It was in a thick, yellow, classified-level case. It was a device that screamed federal. Officer Miller, the cop, recognized it for what it was. His face went, if possible, even whiter. You're right, Officer Miller, I said, not even looking at him. This is a federal situation. I hit a single preset speed dial button. The phone didn't ring. It just connected. This is Inspector Clark, badge 47, I said, my voice now a pure operational bark. The entire terminal, the 200 passengers, the live stream followers who were listening, they were all silent, bearing witness. I have an active 18 USC 1519 and 18 USC 242 in progress at O'Hare, Terminal 4, Gate C-12. I have 2 hostile civilian targets and 1 compromised local Leo. I need a Federal Air Marshal tactical team and a DHS OIG certified forensics unit here. Now, authorization code, Clark Alpha Tango 47. I hung up. I didn't wait for a reply. It was done. The cavalry was coming. What did you do? Gary stammered, his eyes wide. Who did you call? I said, turning to him, summoned the real security, the ones with real jurisdiction, the ones who will be handling the forensics on that. I pointed to the wastebasket and the depositions from you. I looked at Brenda, who was now openly, gut-wrenchingly sobbing. Brenda, I said, you had 47 complaints filed against you. 47, all for the same ugly, racist pattern and practice. My team has been investigating you, Gary, and your entire cash for upgrade scam for 6 months. This, I said, wasn't just me flying. This was a sting. I was here for you. I was here in this hoodie with this real, federally issued diplomatic passport to see if you would do exactly what your pattern suggested you would do. I never in my wildest dreams imagined you'd be stupid enough to set it on fire. I smiled, a cold, hard, and deeply satisfying smile. You didn't just destroy evidence, Brenda. You didn't just assault a passenger. You gift-wrapped the entire federal case against you. You handed me on a silver platter an undeniable, irrefutable, and publicly broadcast felony. You're not just fired. You are, as of this moment, under federal arrest. My badge was not just a piece of metal, it was a key, and it had just unlocked a room full of federal charges. Brenda Martinez, the woman who had, just moments ago, commanded me to get on my knees, was now crumpled in a gate chair, her body shaking in violent, silent sobs. Gary, the supervisor who had smugly winked at her, was leaning against a pillar, his face the color of wet concrete, his eyes wide and vacant. He was doing the math. He was, correctly, terrified. And Officer Miller, the local muscle, was sweating, his hand hovering over his radio, his brain screaming at him that he was, in fact, an accessory to a federal crime. This was the deconstruction, and I was just getting started. "You asked who I am," I said, my voice cutting through the terminal. The 200 passengers were now a silent, captivated audience, their phones a wall of recording lenses. "I am Senior Inspector Maya Clark. My badge number is 47, but I am not just an inspector. I am the chief investigator for the FAA's National Anti-Discrimination Task Force, codenamed Operation Terminal Rot." I pointed at the gate, at Brenda, at Gary. "My only job, Gary, the job the United States Senate confirmed me for, is to hunt people exactly like you. For 6 months, my team, a joint task force from the FAA, the DHS Office of the Inspector General, and the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, has been building this case. A case that started because of your terminal." This was my resume. "We've received 47 separate official passenger complaints of racial bias in the last 18 months, 47, all originating from this gate. 32 of those complaints, Brenda, name you personally. And all 47, Gary, were cleared, unfounded, no merit, or passenger non-compliant, and all 47 were cleared by you. You weren't just clearing them, Gary, you were conspiring." I turned to Brenda, her sobs now audible. "You called my passport fake. You called it ghetto trash. You said I was the fraud. But you are the fraud, Brenda." I turned to the room, to the cameras. "This wasn't just racism for sport. It was racism for profit. You've been running a cash for upgrade scam for 2 years, haven't you? Waiving baggage fees for cash, bumping ticketed minority passengers from flights you knew were oversold. Passengers just like me. Only to sell those last-minute first-class seats to your white standby friends for a $200 cash gratuity. We have the logs. We have the bank deposits. Your 47 acts of racism weren't just prejudice. They were the cost of doing business. You harassed and bounced minority passengers to create the inventory for your criminal scam. You're not just a racist, Brenda. You're a thief." Gary's head snapped up. That's a lie. You can't prove that." "Can I?" I smiled. This was the hard evidence. This was the avalanche. "You want to talk about evidence, Gary? You're worried about these phones." I swept my arm at the sea of passengers who were all still recording. "This is just gravy. This is the human interest story. This is what gets you fired. Let's talk about the federal evidence. The evidence that gets you incarcerated." "Receipt number 1, the federal tap." I pointed up. "You see that CCTV dome right above your head? Camera 4C. The one you and Gary thought was just a silent video feed for the terminal manager. My team has had a federal warrant and a live audio-video tap on that camera and 3 others at this gate for 6 weeks. We have everything. We have every racist slur you've muttered under your breath, Brenda. We have every cash handoff at the end of your shift. We have every time you, Gary, told a passenger the flight was full and then took a $100 bribe 5 minutes later. We have a 600-hour-long movie of your entire criminal enterprise, starring you." Number 2, my wire. I tapped the strap of my messenger bag. "I'm a federal agent. I'm always recording. My entire interaction with you, Brenda, and you, Gary, and you, Officer Miller, is on a high-definition encrypted audio file. The file that has already been time-stamped, geotagged, and uploaded to a secure DHS cloud server as of 90 seconds ago. The file that perfectly captured you, Brenda, calling me ghetto trash. The file that captured your on-your-knees command. The file that captured you, Gary, winking at her and promising a commendation for committing a felony. The file that captured you, Officer Miller, agreeing to file a false police report for trespassing against a federal agent. Receipt number 3, your finances. I looked at Brenda. My team at the DHS Office of the Inspector General has had your financials for a month. We have a full trace. We have the $34,000 in unexplained cash deposits to your checking account over the last 12 months, all in $50 and $100 increments, all deposited like clockwork the day after you handled a problem passenger. It's not just a pattern and practice, Gary. It's a RICO-level conspiracy. This was the villain's collapse. It was total. Brenda Martinez didn't just stumble, she collapsed. She fell from the gate chair to the floor, her body shaking, hyperventilating, a low, keening, animal sound of pure, abject terror coming from her throat. I didn't know, she sobbed, crawling on the dirty floor. It was, Gary, do something, tell them it was. It looked fake, I thought it was fake. But Gary, her competitor supervisor, her partner in crime, was in no position to do anything. He had staggered back from my badge as if I'd physically struck him, and was now doubled over, vomiting, violently vomiting, into the very same metal wastebasket that held the smoldering, ashen ruins of my passport. He was, quite literally, choking on his own crimes, the smell of his fear mixing with the acrid smoke of the burning federal document. And Officer Miller, the muscle, he was a ghost. He was pressed against the terminal wall, his face as white as a sheet, his hands raised, his radio crackling. Dispatch, cancel that supervisor request. Get me the airport duty captain and tell him to call the U.S. Attorney's office. This scene it's federal, it's all federal. I'm stepping away, I'm uninvolved. Uninvolved, I said, my voice like a gunshot, freezing him in place. You're an accessory to this. I walked over to the wastebasket. Gary recoiled from it, stumbling away, wiping bile from his mouth. I reached in, my fingers brushing past the warm ashes, and pulled out the largest, most recognizable piece. It was the charred, bubbled, and warped back cover of my passport. The gold-embossed federal seal of the United States was still, miraculously, partially visible. This is your final receipt, Brenda, the one you created. I held it up for the room and the cameras to see. You didn't just tear a passport. You didn't just burn a document. You struck a match and you set this on fire. You set the seal of my country on fire, in front of 200 witnesses and a global live stream. You didn't just assault a passenger. You committed a political act. You desecrated a federal symbol. I let the weight of that settle. I then delivered the final legal charges. You, Brenda Martinez, are under arrest for 18 U.S. Code, Section 1361, destruction of government property. You, Gary, are under arrest for 18 U.S. Code, Section 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States. And all three of you, I included Miller, who let out a small cry, are under arrest for 18 U.S. Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. I looked at them, the woman sobbing, covered in her own tears and passport ash, the man retching, covered in his own vomit, the cop pale, covered in his own cold sweat. You thought I was trash, I said. You thought I was a fraud. You thought you were in charge. You have just learned in the hardest way possible that you are not. You are simply criminals, and your shift is over. The deconstruction was over. The room was a vacuum, all the arrogance and bravado sucked out, leaving only the cold, hard, and undeniable truth. Brenda Martinez, the woman who had, just moments ago, commanded me to get on my knees, was now a crumpled, weeping heap on the dirty terminal floor, her uniform streaked with her own tears and the black, greasy ash of my destroyed passport. Gary, the supervisor who had smugly winked at her, was retching into the same wastebasket, his body convulsing in dry, pathetic heaves. And Officer Miller, the local muscle, was a ghost, pressed against the wall, his face as white as a sheet, his hands raised in a posture of complete and total surrender. The passengers, my silent, 200-person jury, were watching, their phones held high. A forest of digital eyes capturing the final judgment. This was the final speech, the verdict. It was not a time for anger that had passed. It was a time for the cold, hard, and final word. I walked to the center of the gate, to the very spot where Brenda had struck the match. I turned not just to the 3 broken criminals before me, but to the room, to the cameras, to the 800,000 people who were now, according to my team's intel, watching this live. "She says she didn't know," I said, my voice cutting through the terminal, my federal authority amplifying it. Brenda's sobbing plea from the floor, "I thought it was fake. I didn't know," was pathetic. Let's be perfectly clear about what just happened here. She didn't think it was fake. She saw a black woman in a hoodie in a first-class line, and her entire racist, broken, and corrupt system couldn't compute. Her bigotry demanded that I be a fraud. She didn't spot a fake, Brenda. You created one in your own mind, to justify your own bottomless, pathetic hatred. I turned my gaze on Gary, who was wiping bile from his mouth with a trembling hand. "And you," I said, "you're worse. You're the supervisor. You're the one who enabled her. You're the one who built the system that rewarded her for this exact behavior, her 47 prior complaints. Those weren't problems for you, were they, Gary? They were performance reviews. They were proof she was doing her job, keeping the trash out. You didn't just look the other way, Gary. You monetized her racism. Her cash for upgrade scam," I announced to the entire room. "The one where she bumps minority passengers and sells their seats for cash. It doesn't work without you, her supervisor, clearing the complaints and losing the evidence. You are not a manager, Gary. You are the head of the snake." Finally, I looked at Officer Miller, the local cop, the competitor system's muscle. He flinched. "And you," I said, my voice like ice, "you saw 2 airline employees, your friends. You saw one citizen, a black woman, covered in the evidence of a crime, and you instantly sided with the uniforms. You didn't assess the situation. You didn't ask questions. You saw a black woman, you heard the word fraud, and you were ready to tase her, cuff, and drag her to a cell, based on the word of a woman who was literally still holding the match. You're not a peace officer, Miller. You're just their thug." I took a breath. I let the indictment settle. "This," I said to the cameras, "is what systemic means. It's not one bad apple. It is the entire rotting orchard. It's the gate agent who hates, the supervisor who profits from that hate, and the local cop who enforces it. And it only works. It only survives when they think no one is watching." This was the sentence. This was the takedown. And right on cue, I heard it. It wasn't a siren. It was the heavy, rhythmic, terrifying thud-thud-thud of combat boots moving at a dead sprint on the terminal floor. "Hands," a new voice boomed, a voice of pure, unadulterated federal command. The passengers parted like the Red Sea. 4, no, 6. Federal air marshals in full black tactical gear, not just suits but full kit, burst into the gate area. They moved like a single lethal organism. They didn't assess. They acquired. Their weapons were at the low ready, their eyes scanning, their presence a suffocating wave of pure federal power. Inspector Clark, the lead marshal, a man built like a refrigerator, barked, his eyes finding me, his gaze sweeping over my badge case, which I still held open. I nodded. I was no longer the victim. I was the ranking federal officer on the scene. I was in command. "I'm Inspector Clark," I said. "This is my crime scene." I pointed, my hand a blade, delivering the sentence. "That's her. Brenda Martinez. She's the primary. Felony destruction of federal property, 18 U.S.C. 1361. Felony destruction of evidence, 18 U.S.C. 1519. Conspiracy against rights, 18 U.S.C. 241. She is a flight risk. Cuff her." "No," Brenda shrieked, scrambling backward on the floor, her hands covered in the black ash. "No, please, it was a mistake. I. 2 marshals grabbed her, hauling her to her feet with a force that was terrifying, and slammed her face first against the customer service counter, right next to the smoldering wastebasket. The crack of her head hitting the counter, followed by the zip click of the heavy-duty restraints, was the sound of her career, her pension, and her freedom ending. "That's him," I said, pointing to the retching, weeping Gary. "Gary Phillips, supervisor, accessory after the fact. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, 18 U.S.C. 371. He's the ringleader of the financial scam. He is also a flight risk. Cuff him. No, no, I have a pension, Gary sobbed as two more marshals grabbed him, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall, his $400 suit ripping at the shoulder. And him, I said, my voice like a gavel, pointing to Officer Miller, who was now a trembling, pale ghost. Local Leo. Accessory. Deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. 242. He attempted to file a false police report and unlawfully detain a federal agent. He is complicit. Cuff him. You can't, Miller sputtered, his voice a pathetic squeak. I'm local Leo. You don't have jurisdiction. The lead marshal, the one built like a refrigerator, got directly in Miller's face, his voice a low, gravelly growl. You just tried to detain a federal agent, you idiot. You are lucky you are not being charged with emptying a federal investigation. You have no jurisdiction here. We do. Now put your hands behind your back, officer, or I will personally introduce your face to that floor. Miller, weeping, his authority gone, his power stripped, did as he was told. It was over. The bully, the enabler, the muscle. All three cuffed, all three broken, all three exposed in front of the entire watching and filming world. This was the final gavel drop. As the marshals dragged Brenda away, she made one last, desperate, pathetic plea. She looked at me, her eyes wild, her face a mask of tears and passport ash. Please, she screamed, her voice a raw shriek. It was a mistake. I didn't know you were. You. I stepped in front of her. I blocked her path. I looked her dead in the eyes. I reached into the wastebasket and pulled out the single, charred, melted fragment of the passport's cover. The gold American eagle, the federal seal of the United States, was still, miraculously visible, a warped, melted, but undeniable symbol. That's the point, Brenda, I said, my voice a whisper, but it was the loudest thing in the room. It shouldn't matter who I am. You didn't just destroy a passport. You didn't just burn a document. You, in your blind, arrogant, and petty hatred, struck a match, and you set this on fire. You set the seal of my country on fire. I held it up for her and the cameras to see. You didn't make a mistake. You committed a crime. You didn't just insult a passenger. You assaulted a federal officer. I turned to the lead marshal. Get her out of my sight, I commanded. She's contaminating my crime scene. As the marshals dragged the three of them away, the passengers, who had been holding their breath for 20 minutes, erupted. It wasn't just clapping. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation. It was the sound of justice, delayed but finally delivered. The live streams were capturing the final, satisfying shot of the villains, defeated, humiliated, and in federal custody. My government phone buzzed in my bag, the one that had been ringing off the hook. I pulled it out, my hand steady. This is Inspector Clark, I said, my voice calm, the adrenaline fading, replaced by the cold, clean satisfaction of a job well done. Yes, Mr. Director, the sting operation was a complete, unqualified success. We have them. We have all of them. Yes, sir. The evidence is perfect. The arrest was just the beginning. The real verdict, the one that shakes the foundations of a corrupt system, is never delivered with handcuffs. It is delivered with spreadsheets, with indictments, and with legislation. The systemic takedown of Brenda Martinez, Gary Phillips, and the entire complicit airline management structure was not just a ripple, it was a tidal wave. The viral videos, which by now had been viewed a combined 47 million times, were not just entertainment. They were Exhibit A in a federal case that would rewrite the rules of air travel. First, the competitors were punished. Their sentences were swift and severe. Brenda Martinez, the gate agent who had struck the match, was faced with an avalanche of irrefutable evidence. 19 different passenger videos, my own federal recordings, and the testimony of her co-conspirators. She pled guilty. Her 15 years of service meant nothing. The judge, citing the appalling, racist, and malicious nature of her crime and her sociopathic abuse of authority, sentenced her to 36 months in federal prison for the destruction of government property and deprivation of rights. Her commendation from Gary was a federal jumpsuit. Gary Phillips, the supervisor, the ringleader, fared worse. My team's audit, the one that began with Operation Terminal Rot, proved he had personally masterminded and profited from the Cash for Upgrade scam, a scheme that had defrauded the airline and its customers of an estimated $1.2 million over 3 years. He was found guilty not just of conspiracy and obstruction, but of multiple counts of wire fraud and money laundering. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. He will be in his 60s when he's eligible for parole, his pension gone, his career erased, his name a permanent synonym for corrupt. And Officer Miller, the local cop who had tried to uninvolve himself, his department, facing catastrophic federal lawsuits for complicity and a pattern and practice of civil rights violations, fired him before the federal trial even began. He was found guilty of conspiracy against rights and obstruction. He received 2 years probation and was permanently decertified. He can never, in any state, ever be a police officer again. His badge was, in effect, melted down, just as he had watched Brenda melt mine. But the real victory was not the jail time, it was the systemic change. The airline whose vice president had flown in to manage the situation was next. They couldn't just fire Brenda and Gary, we had them. We had the 47 prior complaints Gary had cleared. We had the pattern, the proof of deliberate indifference. The Department of Justice, led by my task force, didn't just slap them on the wrist. We gutted them. The airline was fined $50 million by the Department of Justice for systemic civil rights violations and failure to supervise. It was one of the largest fines in aviation history. Furthermore, they were placed under a 5-year federal consent decree, the most stringent ever imposed on a U.S. carrier. My team, the FAA's Criminal Enforcement Division, would now be their shadow management. We would have direct, unannounced, and unlimited oversight over their hearing, their training, their promotion protocols, and their complaint handling system. Their internal affairs was now my office. And even that wasn't the real ripple effect. The real victory was permanent. My final report on Operation Terminal Rot, which now had the viral passport-burning video as its horrifying cover page, was sent to the Secretary of Transportation and to Congress. It contained a single, non-negotiable recommendation. And in an act of rare, swift, bipartisan agreement, Congress passed what the media immediately dubbed the Inspector Clark Act. It was a simple, revolutionary piece of legislation. It mandated body-worn cameras for all customer-facing, credential-checking airline and TSA personnel in the United States. My receipt, the secret wire I had been wearing, was now standard mandatory federal policy. The era of the petty, racist, gate-agent tyrant, the he-said-she-said defense, was over. We had in one move ended their ability to hide in the shadows. We had made the bystander's phone a piece of government equipment. As for me, I was promoted. I no longer just investigate. I now run the entire expanded division, Director, Aviation Civil Rights Enforcement. My Operation Terminal Rot became the blueprint for 12 other operation investigations, now active at every major hub in the country. My burned passport, the charred, melted fragments were sealed in an evidence bag and now sit in a display case at the FAA's Training Academy in Quantico, a permanent lesson to every new agent. They thought she was ghetto trash. They forgot she was the inspector. They thought they were just burning a piece of paper. They had no idea they were just illuminating their own crimes. They tried to erase my identity, but they only, in their magnificent cosmic arrogance, succeeded in broadcasting it to the entire world. They learned the hard way. Justice isn't just about arresting the bully. It's about dismantling the system that built the bully, funded the bully, and protected the bully. If you believe that no one, not a cop, not a manager, and especially not a gate agent, is above the law, like this video and subscribe for more stories where the entitled, the corrupt, and the arrogant finally get what's coming to them. Comment below. What was the most satisfying part of this federal takedown? The 10-year prison sentence, the $50 million fine, or the new law forcing body cameras on all gate agents?